All right, good morning, everybody. Introductions. My name's Grant Burton. I am one of the regional team leaders for the Queensland Nursing and Midwifery Union. And I have a passion for nurse practitioners, and I oversee our statewide nurse practitioner branch, the QNMU. So I'll begin with acknowledgement of country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today. And I'd like to also pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the meeting today, and to elders past, present and emerging, and QNMU's commitment to the voice and the Uluru Statement of the Heart. I'd also like to, the QNMU is committed to ensuring all its gatherings, including meetings, functions and events, are free from all forms of harassment, discrimination and racism, and attendees have the right to be safe and respected. And I ask that all attendees act in accordance with these values. And if you have any concerns, please raise them of the convener of this meeting, which is me. So welcome today to this webinar information session from some wonderful nurse practitioners at the Royal North Shore Sydney Hospital, ICU in fact. And we have Sarah Webb, Jessica Butler, Elliot Williams, Kelly Harbour, Katie Calloway online, and a bit of a bio I'm going to read here from a few of them. So Sarah is an ICU nurse practitioner and was a driving force behind the creation of an ICU NP model of care at the Royal North Shore in 2014. Sarah has over 19 years experience in intensive care, where she has worked as a clinical nurse specialist, ICU clinical coordinator, ICU clinical educator, resuscitation clinical nurse consultant since 2014. Sarah has been building an adult intensive care NP model and promoting NP role. Sarah has completed Master of Nursing in Intensive Care, a graduate diploma of midwifery, and a Master of Nursing nurse practitioner. She is a midwife and briefly worked in aeromedical retrieval. Sarah has a particular interest in developing advanced practice nursing and intensive care and building a framework to support the clinical training of the future of nurse practitioners. Jess has over 12 years experience in ICU, has worked in various roles within ICU, such as quality coordinator, clinical nurse specialist, clinical nurse educator, and a member of the rapid response team since 2016. Jess has been an MP at Royal North Shore ICU, completing her studies in 2017, and is grateful to be part of the ICU NP service, striving for clinical excellence, collegiality, and further development of other advanced practice nurses. Prior to completing a pre-registration Master in Nursing, Jess completed a Bachelor of Science, Pharmacology and Physiology. After commencing at Royal North Shore, Jess went on to complete Graduate Certificate in Critical Care Nursing, a Master of Advanced Nursing Education, and a Master of Nursing Nurse Practitioner. Jess enjoys working with a dynamic, flexible, multidisciplinary team to provide educational clinical practice support of ICU staff, and Jess' interests include education, multidisciplinary team building, ventilation, tracheostomies, case management, and continuous renal replacement therapy. Elliot is an intensive care nurse practitioner working at the Royal North Shore in Sydney. Elliot's worked for 10 years there, has postgraduate qualification in critical care, Master of Nursing nurse practitioner from University of Sydney, subspecialty interests in vascular access and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. He is a member of the ACI New South Wales ECMO advisory group, runs the ECMO course at Royal North Shore, and is a nursing lead for ECMO and ICU at Royal North Shore. Elliot has been involved in postgraduate teaching for many years, initially as a clinical fellow for the Faculty of Health at University of Technology Sydney, and now for Sydney Nursing School, Faculty of Medicine, Health and University of Sydney as a casual academic. In addition to these roles, Elliot has a long affiliation with pre-hospital care space through his work at St John's Ambulance, New South Wales, where he's currently the Deputy Commissioner of Clinical Systems. In this extensive role, he has responsibilities for strategic leadership in the areas clinical governance, clinical practice, St John's Ambulance. Elliot was also a member of the Clinical Practice Committee of New South Wales Ambulance, where he provides expert advice relating to nursing practice and his relevant areas of specialisation. Elliot is a dedicated father and husband who enjoys spending time with his family and friends. Kelly is an intensive care nurse practitioner, Royal North Shore, Sydney, and has been nursing in intensive care for more than 10 years. She has a master of both advanced nursing nurse practitioner and previous experience as a nurse manager, research nurse, and rapid response team nurse. Her special areas of interest are neurocritical care and end-of-life care for critically unwell patients. Kelly has a strong passion for empowering the nursing workforce to provide exceptional care. Katie, I think Katie's the only one. Have I missed anyone apart from Katie?
I think the bios might have come. Katie's our transitional nurse practitioner who's training with us, and is we do need to do an official bio for her because she's absolutely incredible. But Katie's been working in ICU for seven or eight years, and she's currently studying at the University of Sydney. Her background is in the neurointensive care unit, where she's a bit of a star, and she's just marching through all of the care competencies that we're throwing at her. So she's a bit of a star here.
Wonderful. All right. Well, if that's everybody, then sorry if I did miss anyone. I'm going to throw to Jess to start this presentation.
Thanks.
Perfect. Can you see there?
Brilliant.
Yeah,
let me see if I
can get requests.
Yeah.
Just you're controlling one screen. Let me see now. It's not. Oh, yeah, there we go. Perfect. My apologies. All right, sorry everybody, after that technical little hitch. Thank you for having us today. We're really excited to be here sharing a little bit about our ICU nurse practitioner program and how we hope that we can add to the training and the development of the role throughout Australia. Sorry, it's a bit of a lag on my side. I would like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Northern Sydney region where this presentation was created, the Gamilaroi, Gumarai and the Durung people. Their spirits can be found across the region, and we honour the memory of their ancestors and elders past and present. As we endeavour to serve the health needs within the community, we recognise the importance of the land and the waterways as an integral part of the people's health and well-being. So a little bit about us. We work within Royal North Shore Hospital. It's a 636 bed facility. It's part of the Metro, or it's within Metro New South Wales, or Sydney, sorry, in the North Shore area. So if you know Sydney at all, we're on the north side of the bridge. And we serve a population about greater than 330,000. Within our unit, though, we are a 58-bed unit with 2 general pods with 16 beds each, a cardiothoracic pod of 13 beds, and a neuroscience pod of 13 beds. We are a state referral service for burns, acute spinal injuries, and interventional neuroradiology. And in order to operate that, we've got about 230 FTE of nurses and 23 ICU intensive care specialists to roster or to cover that population. In terms of our staffing, we're pretty well staffed, I should say. We've got a fairly wide breadth of nursing staffing. So a nurse manager runs the 4 pods, and each pod has a nurse unit manager. We have 1 clinical nurse consultant, which we'd really like to see increased. We don't think that that's enough to serve the 58 beds that we have, plus nurse educators per pods, team leaders. At the moment, we are funded for 2 official nurse practitioner positions, but we've also got an additional 2 positions that we'll talk about later. We also have RRT nurses, research nurses and follow-up clinics nurses that help staff our unit. Every unit, so every one of the pods in the unit, the 4 pods, has an intensive care specialist, an advanced trainee or trainee, and a resident covering their unit each day. We also have an after-hours specialist that was implemented during COVID, so they run from 4 till 10 p.m. to cover all admissions and issues that happen at that point. A rapid response service that has an intensive care specialist-led service, so they, in hours, have the availability of a specialist plus a trainee who work with the RRT nurse. nurse. And then we have admitting officers. And then, as you'd expect, we have a lot of allied health who help us to coordinate and care for our patients. We have an interesting question we get regularly is, why do we, having all that staff, need ICU NPs? And I think we have to look at a few different variables as to why we need to increase ICU nurse practitioners, but particularly not just in metropolitan areas. So as we all know, there's an aging population, and by the time 2031 comes around, it's expected that 20% of the population will be over the age of 35. 35, that's definitely not. Maybe I'm feeling geriatric, 65, sorry. And as we know as well, with increasing age, we increase our chronic illnesses. And so the complexity, the acuity, and the demand for critical services increases. And this is not just in metropolitan areas, but also in regional and rural areas. And overall, we know that there's an increasing demand for critical care outside the metropolitan areas, where patients are needing access to critical care that is not right there right at the moment. From a nursing workforce perspective, we know that there is a large attrition rate at the moment. So pre-COVID, it was at 25%, and we know that that attrition rate is increasing. By 2030, we know there's going to be at least a shortage of 123,000 nurses, which will increase the demand on our services. I think the scariest thing that we've now seen is, since 2019, there's been a doubling of non-practicing registered nurses within our workforce, which is a significant, I guess, indicator of where people are going, or that they're leaving our workforce. And we know that there's about 500 non-practicing nurse practitioners that could be utilised or could be practicing within our health service. And from a medical point of view, we also know that there is issues around getting access to services, or to clinicians within different areas. So we know that 94% of the medical workforce live in our cities, which is not where 94% of our population live. The capacity for our medical colleagues to be training is reducing. So as positions, as positions aren't increased with population demands, we know that there aren't specialist positions for trainees to train into. So we are losing that middle area or middle level doctor who is coming to training, and we need to be able to fill that gap, or help fill that gap. And we also know it takes an extensive period for them to train. So there's a number of things that we know we just can't change overnight, and increasing our medical workforce is one of those. So that's why we think, or we know, that we need ICU nurse practitioners. Excuse me, sorry. That clicked over. It's very slow, sorry. I've gone too far. So sorry, so in terms of an ICU nurse practitioner, I just wanted to, I guess, reiterate that we all work to the nurse practitioner standards framework as outlined by APRA. And those have the four domains. So the clinical domains that cross through education, research, and leadership. And by showing competency within these areas, that's how we gain independent and autonomous practice. So how does that look for an ICU nurse practitioner? So for us, it looks like this. We have 4 real core areas of practice and scope of practice that come under tracheostomy, ventilated intra-hospital transfers, vascular access, and complex cases or complex care. And what we want to make sure is that anytime that we're adding to our scope of practice, that we're able to manage across these 4 domains: the research, the clinical, the education, and the leadership. So for instance, for the ventilated inter-hospital transfers, we have a training program for new nurse practitioners, but also medical officers who go through a system of credentialing in order to be deemed competent within that area. And so for us, that was initially us becoming competent in that area, showing safe clinical practice. And since then, since we've built on our skills, we have then built on the training skills, or the training program within our unit. And now we're the lead with that training program, both for nursing and medical. So our scope of practice is quite varied, but the thing we've really picked on is the things that we know that no matter which ICU in, you're probably going to have to come up against some of these core areas, the real bread and butter of ICU that we think makes a service or a position sustainable and applicable to ICUs across the country. So our scope of practice falls into our model of care. And so at the moment, we have 4 NP FTE and we have a rotating weekly roster. The reason we do that is because we think that it helps to increase staff and corporate knowledge, or with our corporate knowledge. So we all get to work in the different areas within our scope. It also helps increase service sustainability. When we were setting up the service, particularly when we added the vascular access service to our portfolio, so a bit of background on that, there was no vascular access service within our hospital, and that's how we helped to get towards our second FTE of nurse practitioner. When we were doing that, we really found that a lot of people who were doing this regularly said, do not do it full time. More so because it means that you've got a sustainable workforce who can rotate through this procedural area, but also because you're then yourself as a clinician are changing your area of practice on a regular basis, and really don't feel like you're stagnating or getting sort of stuck into one core area. So we rotate through the vascular access service, through the ICU for clinical cover, and at the moment we've got an FTE for service development, non-clinical, and then general cover of our positions. So this is what our sort of monthly roster would look like, depending on which NP you are. But we didn't get here just at the kind of blink of an eye. It was actually quite a process that we built on in order to develop our service. So Sarah is the OG, and we refer to her as such, a nurse practitioner in our ICU. And she was pivotal in developing this service through a pilot program that she commenced in 2014. And the real part of that, or the real important aspect that we think was important for that year, was showing how we can do safe, advanced clinical practice. So that was thinking about the scope of practice, and that's when the 4 core areas really came to mind, or where we're focused on for the development of the service, and showing that we could do the procedural skills, we could learn the theoretical knowledge that we could really build on and have this safe, advanced clinical practice. And we think that's real core to any service development of a nurse practitioner, whatever area it's in. As you can see then, we've started building on each of our abilities over the years. So after showing that we could do safe, advanced clinical practice, we moved into educating within that area and becoming a real, I guess, point of reference or contact people to know that people could come to us and to learn around these areas of advanced clinical practice. We then became the clinical lead for the tracheostomy team for the hospital, again, adding to that portfolio of knowledge and leadership. And then from there, we've developed things like the vascular access service. So we knew that we were doing vascular access well in ICU, and we put it to the hospital with a brief to say that we believe, and we know now, that we can run a vascular access service and not only achieve the safe, advanced clinical practice, but also have some significant cost savings for the hospital and some significant increase in the way that we care for these patients, and improving the patient experience. So now we're really moving from phase 3 to phase 4, where we now want to really focus on our case management program. So that was one area that was very ad hoc, and we're now focusing on a trigger system and having patients triggered onto our service with a bit more of a structure and routine, but also developing an NP training program. And that's what really we'd like to talk to you guys about today, or sort of show you where we think that should go. We think it's always important when you're building a service to make sure that you can show outcomes. And I think one of the big key points is anytime you're trying to do service provision development is to make sure that you thought about how you're going to evaluate it. So for us, phase 2 of our service, which is when we implemented the vascular access service, We saw a number of organisational, staff and patient outcomes that were quite exciting, but also we knew that it was great to show that we were having an impact on patients. So patients were getting home quicker, they were not waiting for their devices for as long, but we've also increased the continuity of care for these patients. So you get to know the real difficult vascular access patients, and that we think has really helped with, you know, avoiding people getting multiple attempts at vascular access when there's probably a better device choice for them. For the staff, we know that we've increased education and training, and also career opportunities for nurses. So for that, we mean that we have a CNS2 that works with our vascular access service, and that position has become a bit of a rotating position for people to come through and start to build on their advanced clinical practice. And something we really value is not just increasing the number of nurse practitioners within Australia, but increasing how much people are working to their own scope of practice, whatever level of nurse they are. And we think that opportunities like this can really help to provide those sort of opportunities for these nurses who might want to stay within the hospital, but might want to add to their advanced practice portfolio. We've also seen a reduction in time of how long it takes to train NPs. And again, this is something we think we should really can utilise to help train our future nurse practitioners in other centres. And there's always interesting to show a monetary outcome. And so we've been able to, by reducing that waiting time for PICC insertions, we reduce or increase cost savings for the hospital significantly. And that's whether you compare bed days, the cost of us doing a procedure as to other clinicians, but also things like being able to bill for things that we weren't billing prior to the implementation of the service. As I mentioned, we think it's really important that the training aspect has increased, or has been able to give us this opportunity to train nurses quicker to become nurse practitioners. So for Sarah, there was not very much infrastructure at all for her training, and that meant her coming in on her own time, scourging around for lines and things, trying to sort of get her advanced clinical practice portfolio built. But once we had this more sort of structured approach, I took over from Sarah when she went on mat leave, and we noticed an increase in, or a decrease in time it took me to train for those core competencies, and that time just continues to reduce. I mean, I don't think we'll get it too much shorter than a year, but we're hoping that you know, we can show that you can do pockets of parts of these competencies in short periods and still be advanced clinical practice nurses safely. So our training time is reduced the more NPs that we have to help train the NPs. And I think it's really important, and hopefully what you guys take from this presentation, and one of the things anyway, is how we did it. So as mentioned, we really focus on showing safe advanced clinical practice, because that's what gives people the confidence and the confidence in us being able to do this practice, but shows that we can own these areas of advanced clinical practice. It's been really important to engage our key stakeholders within our unit and outside of our unit. So lots of meetings, lots of briefs, lots of, you know, showing people within our organisation how we can help to add to the patient experience, but also to be cost saving or develop services that help to do that. We looked to strategic plans and made sure that we were aligning with it. I guess we all know that there's no point really sort of building on things if we don't think that it's in the strategic plans of your health service, your unit, your state health service, anything like that. We identified potential candidates early, and also, you know, make sure that we cast the net wide for people who might be able to come and do this sort of this role, because we think that if you start to build and start to garner interest early, it really gives you somewhere to go when you've got a position for someone to work into. We thought it was really important to observe other nurse practitioners, and Sarah will talk a little bit more about how we've done that outside of Australia. But every time that we have added a portfolio or wanted to increase one of our portfolios, we've made sure we've gone to the experts in other areas to really understand how that could work and be used. And we are now looking at things like early data collection and evaluation. I guess that's one of the big things that you need to make sure that you've got a way to prove that what you're doing is beneficial, and not just in a monetary sense, but for patients and staff as well. So I'll hand over to Sarah now to tell us a little bit of where to from here, and why we're really here to talk to you today.
Thanks, JB. Can you stop?
Oh, yep.
Rolling? Yep.
I will give up remote control.
Thanks. Check the words. Oh, okay. There's something in the chat. Let's have a look. Oh, there'll be time for questions. Yep. Feel free to put your hand up and we can ask questions as we go, or we can also answer some questions at the end if you like to. So thanks, JB. So as we have been on this journey, always in the back of our mind has been, how can we build the service? How can we build the workforce? It's really lonely as implementing it by yourself, or when it's a new position in your organization. So how can we make that better? And we kind of came to these 3 points. Clinical education is going to be key, because there's been a lot of work at the legislation level, a lot of work at the university level, a lot of work in policies that have opened up the doors for nurse practitioners. But where, in our experience, the gap is really in the clinical education. So how do we train nurses at the bedside to be nurse practitioners? NP role standardization. This isn't to say that every nurse practitioner that works in intensive care needs to have the same scope of practice as someone else, but they're going to be similar. And we feel that the way to do that is to make sure that we're all singing off the same hymn sheet. We're all networking. You should be able to go into any intensive care unit and have an understanding of what the nurse practitioner there does. It doesn't have to be exactly the same skills, but they're going to be able to do, you'll have an idea of what their role is. And then finally, it's really role promotion. You know, how do we get it out there? There's still such little, it's getting better in nursing, but in the medical and in other health professions, the nurse practitioner role is still relatively new and unheard of, and a lot of people don't really understand it. So trying to build promote the role as much as we can, we think is going to be really key to build us and keep moving forward. So we thought about how we might be able to address these. What can we do? And we're really keen to give back. We've had an incredibly fortunate journey here. We've had supportive medical staff, supportive nursing staff, and supportive hospital executive, all the way up to our chief executive and the hospital board. So, and it's taken us this long to get where we are, and that's with really a dream run. So it is very difficult, and what we want to do is try and make it easier for other nurse practitioners and other health services to implement the role or to build their service. So we think the best way to do that is we're looking at a 2-year program. Sorry. We came up with the idea of a 2-year program, and that 2-year program has 2 objectives. The first is to look at a case management program. So as Jess said, when we started, we focused on core clinical activities, tracheostomies, vascular access, intra-hospital transports, and complex case management. But really, nurse practitioners, as you probably know, it's not about the episodes of care, it's about looking after the whole patient. But that strategy was really important when we were implementing the role, because no one knew anything about nurse practitioners. So we wanted to kind of ring fence some clinical activities to demonstrate that this is what we're doing and we're going to do it really well. We're not trying to take over the world, because I think if we came in with nurse practitioners can do everything and anything, it might have put up some barriers for us. But now that we're a bit more established here, we're looking at coming back to that more holistic model through this case management program. So we're looking at, we're focusing on patients that we know tend to stay in ICU for longer lengths of stay, which is more than 21 days. We know that we'll probably have a cap on the number of patients that nurse practitioners can look after. We're thinking at the moment it'll probably be 4 patients, intensive care patients per nurse practitioner. And if we went back and looked at all the patients that stayed in ICU for more than 21 days in the last few years, and we found that it's about 60 per year. So if we could shave just 2 days off each of those lengths of stay, it is a cost savings of about $480,000 per year. So when we pitched this, that these are the sorts of things that we were you know, saying was this is where we looked at the financial aspect. The second objective is to implement a training program. So this training program is going to be immersive. It relies on high volume training. We understand that it's difficult enough as it is to get the procedural volume, and that's in a big intensive care unit in a city. So I can only imagine how difficult it would be if you're in a regional ICU where you don't get that many or as many central lines or as many procedures. Just as important as the procedural training is and the clinical training is the organizational support. So how do you do a needs analysis? How do you do a business case? Because if you're looking at implementing the role, you've got to demonstrate that it's what the expected benefits are. And so you need to know where to look, which we are hoping to help with, not just during the training program, but we want to establish relationships beyond that as well. So, you know, if there's a nurse practitioner that's come to do the training program with us and then a year later, they're back in their health service and they're looking at expanding, we'd love them to reach out to us and we'd be happy to help them look at their business case for the next phase of their service. The long-term game of this is that we could build a hub and spoke model where we'd have training hubs and then smaller services would be able to rotate through. Rotations through to provide clinical training for nurse practitioners has been something that's been recognised in a number of strategic plans. So we think that this is aligning with that. And we want to offer that not just to nurse practitioners that are coming to train here, coming to work here, but ideally for nurse practitioners that work in regional and remote areas, because we want to support the talent in their home health services, rather than relying so much on fly in, fly out, for example, or attracting healthcare providers from the cities to go out to these regional areas. There's a focus, and we'd love to be able to help with training people that already live in those areas that want to build their skills. And then finally, network nurse practitioner services. You know, we all operate in silos, and nurse practitioner roles are often built in areas where there's a need. So they're often built on local, based on local sort of health service needs. But the benefit of knowing each other and seeing how other services work is really quite important. There's many more strategic plans, but these are a few of the key ones. They all talk about the importance of supporting nurse practitioners, candidates to come and train in training rotations. So we're comfortable that we're on the right track here. And so far we haven't seen any other fellowship programs being offered, but we have been speaking to a number of regional areas and metropolitan centres that would be very keen to be a part of this as well. So we knew what we wanted to do for the 2-year pilot program, and we knew what objectives we had, and we thought it would take 2 additional nurse practitioners. So then we set about trying to get some funding, and we did a series of presentations to our hospital board, to our hospital chief executive, hospital executive committee. And then they all, as they always do, they always say that sounds really interesting and great, but we don't have the money, which might be something that you've all heard before as well. So we had to look outside our organization, and we were successful in building what we need is $561,000 to do that for 2 years, and we're almost there. We're just $10,000 short, but that was through a series of grant applications and charities that we are affiliated as well. So as Jess said, it's always a good idea to go out and see see how other places are doing things. Last year, Jess and I went to North America and had a look at some intensive care units and their nurse practitioner fellowship programs. The reason we chose the US was just how many nurse practitioners they have. So you can see the comparisons here. There's almost 4 million nurses in the US and only 350,000 in Australia. But when you look at the nurse practitioners, they have exponentially more nurse practitioners than we do. They've been functioning for a few decades more than us, so it's kind of understandable. But there's actually a fellowship association that we stumbled across, which helped us choose which places to go and visit. And they have 169 nurse practitioner fellowship programs. And when we looked through all of those, 27 of those were critical care nurse practitioner fellowship programs. In Australia, we don't have any at the moment. They have so many nurse practitioner fellowship programs that they now have accreditation agencies that actually accredit these fellowship programs. So that's why we went to the US. We looked at NP fellowship programs that were either accredited with distinction, or there was something about them that you know, perhaps they were very well written in the literature. So that was an interest that we wanted to go and see them. We picked about 10, and 6 of them got back to us, and we ended up visiting 5 because one of them was sort of in the north and didn't really, a bit in the northwest, so it was a bit too far out of reach. But we ended up going to Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee, Emory in Atlanta, Georgia, Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, the University of Maryland Medical Center, or the Shock Trauma Center in Baltimore, and Johns Hopkins in Baltimore as well. So we had a set of questions that we asked. We had about a day with each of these places, and we went around, we spoke to hospital executives, we spoke to the intensive care attendings, which is what their word for consultants. They all had sort of nurse practitioner directors. And so we met a lot of people and had some really wonderful days. Some of the days we were sort of touring for 14 hours. It finished with a dinner with a group of key stakeholders, and it was, what we learned was just incredible. We were so fortunate, and these are the main sort of take home points that we had. So the scope of practice just blew us away. What the nurse practitioners do over there is just incredible. They really function as attendings or consultants. The attendings themselves describe the nurse practitioners as the backbones of the units. They said they can do 95% of the entire clinical workload in intensive care. They said it was just that 5% of those really, really rare conditions that the attendings needed to be available for. But in terms of the procedures, and they were just incredible. They didn't really rotate. If there would be a neuro-intensive care nurse practitioner, and that's where they worked all the time. What we also noticed was the pre-qualification experience is actually better in Australia. So you can be employed as a nurse practitioner in an ICU in the US, having never worked in intensive care before, which is quite unusual for us, because in Australia, to work as a nurse practitioner, you need to have done 5,000 hours of advanced clinical practice in your specialty area before you can be endorsed as a nurse practitioner. So we thought that's a really good bonus for us. The fellowship programs range from 9 months to 12 months. They described their peak practice was 1 year after post their fellowship program. So if you compare that to what it takes to train an intensive care specialist, that's a huge difference. They all talked about bespoke learning objectives. They combine clinical and academic learning, and we also came across some regional fellowship programs as well, where the tertiary centres were supporting regional intensive care units to develop the service. Along this path, we've been collaborating with many people. These were some of our early sort of supporters. Mary Chiarella should be up here as well. She's been an absolute godsend for us. She's actually on the board of our hospital, so that's been very helpful to give us some background and some tips on our strategy to build the program. I mentioned earlier that the US have many nurse practitioner fellowship programs, and they've got 4 accreditation agencies. So as we're building our fellowship program, we're using a model which is from the US. They have a manual which you can download and look at. They're looking at doing international accreditations. It is expensive, so we're probably not going to do that. But we thought if we're going to build a nurse practitioner fellowship program, let's do it based on a gold standard, which is the Advanced Practice Provider Fellowship Accreditation from the American Nurses Credentialing Center. And they've got basically 5 domains, which takes you with various supporting documents that you need to have in each piece. So it's a way of just making sure that we're not missing anything. We're looking at everything that needs to be included in a fellowship program. We think that this is a good way to do it because it means that it's scalable. So if we start using it this way, you could imagine that the next fellowship program to be implemented might use this as well. And we're all sort of building our fellowship programs based on the same structure. In terms of the curriculum and how we're building the curriculum, we're using the Nurse Practitioner Clinical Learning and Teaching Framework, which is from 2017 by, I think, Glenn Gardner and Chris Helms, and I forget the other authors. I should have it on here. I'm sorry, my apologies. The professional standards from the Clever 2 study build on the Nursing and Midwifery Board standards, which are the minimum standards for nurse practitioners. These build standards into a range of meta specialties. Critical care, as you can see, is not specifically on here, but it doesn't have to be, because the way these professional standards work is nurse practitioners in any scope, in any health service, would look at these professional standards, and you can actually select various standards from each of these meta specialties. So for example, a pediatric emergency nurse practitioner would take standards from the child and family care and the emergency and acute care. You don't have to just be an emergency and acute nurse practitioner. And I think this has really been a wonderful thing to come across, because it means that what we're trying to do will be transferable. So we're building our curriculum around this, but also any fellowship program that's being developed could use the same structure to build their curriculum. And then as people are looking to come and do fellowship programs, they would know what fellowship standards they need and where they can go to meet them, to have them met. So we've looked at all of the meta specialty standards, and there's 14. This is a very busy slide, but just to give you an idea of the standards that we're looking at for our critical care training program. So we'll have 3 training streams. There's a pre-endorsement fellowship, which is up to 12 months. We're really excited that we've had some conversations with a large university in Sydney about the prospect of having credit points. So if someone comes to do a training program with us, they'll have initially 6 and hopefully 12, down the track 12 credit points to put towards their master's program. But also a post-endorsement fellowship program. This is what most of the US models have. Again, up to 12 months. And this could be particularly interesting for nurse practitioners that want to change specialties. So for example, we know there's lots of NPs out there who trained in one area, so say for example, cardiology, but they couldn't find a job in cardiology, so they transferred into aged care. 5 years later, they might decide they'd like to go back to cardiology, and they could come and do a training program to help transition back to into that specialty again. And what we're most excited about is this idea of the rural generalist education, whereby we'd offer 1 month boot camp style training for people to come and get some high procedural volume, work with us for a month and have an ongoing relationship when they go back via virtual meetings, but also to help them with their organizational planning, so needs analysis, business cases, evaluations, and so forth. So just to give you an idea, again, this is a bit of a busy slide. It's the second to last slide, so we're nearly finished. This is a case study. Imagine that Louise is an experienced ICU nurse at Rockhampton Base Hospital. That's for you, Grant. This ICU has 10 beds. They're adult and pediatric beds, and a common reason for admission is sepsis requiring administration of antibiotics and hemodynamic support. Sometimes these patients require renal replacement therapy, and patients often have difficult access. Louise has always lived in Rockhampton. She loves it. She's born and bred there. She never wants to leave, but she does want to advance her career, and she doesn't want to have to move out of town to do that. After consultation with the Rockhampton ICU and the hospital and the North Shore Fellowship Program, Louise is able to rotate to North Shore ICU for 3 months of high volume clinical training. So this would be 3 back-to-back months of training. During this time, she gained procedural skill in vascular access, intra-hospital transfers of critically unwell patients, and tracheostomy management. During her time at North Shore, she was supported in the organisational development required to implement the role in Rockhampton ICU. This included a needs analysis, a business case, and a draft scope of practice. Then upon returning to Rockhampton, she continued to be supported by the ICU NP program with online and virtual meetings and case presentations. Then 5 years later, with the support of her LHD, Louise is an NP, sorry, that's Rockhampton, with the benefits of having Louise in this role being that she's got the procedural skill to meet the needs of the patients in the ICU. She works closely with the medical nursing and allied health team. She's able to provide training not only to the ICU nursing staff, but also to rotating junior doctors. She's able to mentor primary care NPs and acute care NPs in difficult intravenous access. And she's been able to stay in her own community that she loves. So where to next? We're going to leave you with, and it's really an invitation to come and work with us for a month to trial this 1 month rotation. It would be funded by your current employer. So that's why we're just focusing on 1 month, because that's what seems to be widely supported in the strategic plans. We've looked at some student accommodation, which is available at a hospital down the road at $78 a week, because we understand that housing in Sydney is particularly expensive. So hopefully that could alleviate some of those concerns. We've been talking with our workforce team and to look at the ways that we can legally have trainee nurse practitioners come and work with us, not just to observe, but actually to be hands-on. So that would be by way of a student placement agreement between the universities and our hospital. And this allows them to do immersive clinical training. The organisational support, which we've mentioned already, so we'd be supporting them with needs analysis, business plans, and role to help with their role implementation. And then if they come for 1 week, 1 month, just focus on one procedural skill per month, but they could be back to back. So they might come for 1 month in the first year, 1 month in the second year, or they might come for 3 months like Louise did, 3 months straight away. The choice is yours, but this is where we're up to now, is to start some pilot 1 month training programs. So thank you very much.